Welcome to the Secrets of College Planning. I'm your host, Anthony Uva, and today we're going to get some insight into business. My guest today is Matt Brown. He is the publisher for Extra Points, and welcome to the show.
Anthony, thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Yeah, so Matt, usually I start my guests where they went to college. So where'd you go to school?
I had an interesting path. I grew up outside of Columbus, Ohio, and when I was a high schooler, I was really important to me was getting out of Columbus. I didn't want to go super far away, but I wanted to experience something different from where I had grown up. So I started at American University in Washington, D.C., where I was studying political science. But after a year there, my scholarship situation changed and my health situation changed, as did my family. And I realized, why am I paying all of this money to go to a school that most people haven't heard of? So I ended up transferring back home to Ohio State, which is where I finished.
Ah, fantastic. So let's just go back in time before we get started. In high school, when did you start thinking about going to college? Was it freshman year, senior year? When did it all begin for you?
Honestly, for me, it began even earlier than that, and there's two reasons for it. One, I was really fortunate to grow up in a college town. I'm from a little town called Granville, Ohio, which is home of Denison University. And when you wake up every day and you pass by a liberal arts school on your way to middle school or to high school, and most of your friends work at this school, higher education is becomes part of the conversation at a very early age.
Yeah.
The other thing, and maybe this is something in common with some of your other guests or some of your listeners, but my mother immigrated to the United States from Brazil, and I think definitely internalized the importance of higher education as a way of integrating into American society and to having access to opportunities that maybe she wouldn't have had and her grandparents didn't have. It took her a long time before she eventually went to college herself, and then she became a professor. But it was, I think like many second generation Americans, it was beaten into my skull from a very early age that this is a pathway that we would prefer that you take. Hadn't heard of American when I was in middle school necessarily, but like being aware of the college process was something that was very early on for me.
So that's usually the next question is, how did you end up picking American and then ended up at Ohio State?
Yeah.
What was the thought process?
And honestly, I think I would probably go back and do things differently, if I could. I did not have a ton of money and didn't want to spend a lot of money on fees and applying to a lot of different institutions. So I only applied to five. I applied to Case Western Reserve, which is in Cleveland. It's more of a science and engineering sort of school. That's where my sister was going at the time. I applied to Ohio State. I applied to Miami, Ohio. These were all very popular choices for middle-class, college-bound people where I grew up. I applied to American, and I applied to BYU, which was at the time I was a member of the LDS Church. BYU was very cheap, and there was some pressure in my community, like, I know you're not really considering this place, but you should at least apply. And I got in and thought, great, there's no way in hell I'm going to this place. I'm not doing it. Kind of cast it off to the side. And from there, those four, it was a combination of money. It was a combination. What can I afford? Who gave me the best scholarship package? What I wanted to study. What I thought at 17, what I wanted to study was political science. I thought I wanted to go be an attorney. I thought I wanted to work in education policy, and I wanted to be in a bigger city. And then, Anthony, I'm not ashamed to admit this, but I was 17. And so, coming down to it, but my two finalists were Case Western and American. And one of the biggest reasons I picked American was I've been to Case Western 4 times. The weather in Cleveland sucks. The school is 66, 67% male. I don't see very many pretty women. And American, it's the other way around. I think I'd rather live in DC, and even though that was more expensive. And now looking at this as a 38-year-old man, a father, I go, boy,
Sure.
that wasn't the right decision. But I can't sit here and lie to you and say that factors other than the U.S. News Report and scholarship rankings were part of the equation.
So now you're at American, and what went wrong where you ended up going to Ohio State after that?
Yeah, so in many ways, I think that the first year really was great, and I think it was useful for me as a kid that grew up in a town of 4,000 people,
Yeah.
to go to a place in a bigger city. Like I had never been on a subway train before, right? Until I went to DC. I think I met I made my first Jewish friends. I had met people that from all over the world, all over the country that I had never met in Granville. Like that was a very positive experience. Two things really stood out. One was I had a scholarship package, in part for music and in part for financial aid. There was some staff turnover at American, and that package was not going to be renewed. And so staying there at that kind of private school would have become very expensive. But also, after my freshman year, my father passed away and my mom
Uh-huh.
got really sick. And this happens sometimes, and your life situation changes. And I realized for my family, one, our financial situation is very different, and two, it makes sense for me to be closer to home, than it does there. I think had my financial means or my life situation been different, I might have stayed in America, and that would have been fine. I didn't think about this at the time,
Sure.
but in retrospect, going back to Ohio State, a school that I wasn't really crazy about going to as a 17, 18-year-old, turned out to be a really positive thing for me. I'm not sure I would have my career or I would have started my business had I stayed at AU.
Yeah. So now you graduate from Ohio State. How do you go from graduating Ohio State to becoming a publisher and starting Extra Points?
It was a completely backroads path. So when I graduated from Ohio State with a bachelor's in 2009, which was like 6 recessions ago, essentially. But I remember the Lehman Brothers collapse. I remember reading about that while I was doing my internship because I was contemplating going to law school, and I realized like maybe now's not the best time to borrow 100 grand, and it was difficult for many of my peers to find work. I was fortunate. I got a job with Teach for America, which is it still is, but was a program that pairs high achieving graduates who study something other than education to go teach in high need school districts, and then go on to do something else. So I taught my first job out of college. I got on a plane the day after I got my diploma to Arizona for student teaching training, and I taught fourth grade. I did that in Arizona for a little bit, did that in New Orleans, Louisiana. And
Wow.
and as somebody who makes a living as a reporter now, I think being a fourth grade teacher is an outstanding preparation for this job because there is nothing that any coach or athletic director or business professional could ever say to me that I didn't hear from a 9-year-old with way worse language in the beginning of my career, right? When you're teaching elementary school, the whole job is how do I distill complicated topics as simply and concisely as possible? And how do I talk to people who absolutely do not want to talk to me? And brother, that's journalism, right? Like I didn't realize that then. I did realize though that I was not really qualified to be an inner city school teacher. I lacked the cultural competencies, I lacked the maturity, I lacked the pedagogical skill to be effective in that role. After that, I did political organizing for a little while. Decided, okay, let's go use that political science degree. I ran a field office for a campaign, and I realized this sucks too. Um, if I never knock on another door the rest of my life, that would be very happy. But also similar situation. A lot of talking to people who really do not want to talk to you, and we force you to develop a thick skin. I realized around this time that what I really wanted to do was be a reporter. Ohio State did not have an undergraduate journalism major when I was there. If you're growing up in Ohio and you want to be a reporter, the most popular institution is Ohio University, the Scripps School, which is very, very good. But I didn't make this realization until, my senior year. I didn't have the money to transfer. I needed to
Mhm.
graduate then and go get a job. So I would do something called stringering, where I would go reach out to a local newspaper and say, hey, do you need help covering a high school football game or a school board meeting or an auto show? I'll do it for 50 bucks. I'll do it for 75 bucks. And did that for years. And I was literally about to go quit reporting and go get an MBA because I wasn't making any money and I was working to had a day job working in HR or something until I finally got a full-time reporting job at 25 at Vox Media, which was a great experience. That was a place that was looking for non-traditional journalists. That's where I
Yeah.
really learned the craft, learned a lot of the things that I might have learned had I gone to graduate school or, did undergrad at Northwestern or Syracuse or something. And then when the pandemic hit, I got laid off. So then it's 2020 and I know how to be a reporter. I know how to sell ads. I know how to build an audience and everything, but there's no sports. and there's no other reporting jobs because nobody has any money anymore. And at this point, like you're laughing. Like I'm living in Chicago at this point. I'm married. I have two small children. I I have a mortgage. I got to make money. So I
Yeah.
started Extra Points out of desperation rather
Wow.
than some beautiful entrepreneurial stroke of genius or anything. My thought was this could be a temporary bridge until the pandemic recedes a little bit. Maybe I could get a job at The Athletic or ESPN. But I've been very fortunate that well before then, it grew to the point where suddenly I realized actually this is my job. And
Yeah.
now we have a media company that covers business and policy stories in college athletics, stories that will mirror many of the stories that you're working on or that are relevant to your audiences. Have four full-time employees. We're going to hire some more this year and making a go of what's a challenging industry. And I'm really fortunate that I was able to do that without the same background that most of my peers have.
So what does Extra Points actually do?
So Extra Points at its core is a newsletter company. I publish four newsletters a week. Two of them are completely free and supported by ads. Two of them are behind a subscription paywall with original reporting and analysis about business and policy and off the field stories in college sports. And sometimes that includes that's stories for the largest programs, like where I graduated. A lot of stories about NIL and labor regulations and labor law with Ohio State and Penn State and Oregon. But it also includes stories about Division two and Division three institutions, enrollment-driven and tuition-dependent institutions, and what some of the policy and decision-making looks like for those schools. We also maintain a library of documents, of budget reports and vendor contracts and coach contracts, thousands and thousands of these that we obtain via open records requests. We categorize all of them and then we sell that to newsrooms, academic researchers, or practitioners in this industry. Because if you're at Ohio Northern and you need to hire a volleyball coach and you want to know what the median salary is for maybe some of your peer schools, that's information that we're able to have and share. We're,
Mhm.
we're, we're dipping our toes into other things like event sponsorship. We sponsored a Division three bowl game last year. We'll do that again this year. We're
Wow.
looking at other potential events, but fundamentally, it is more of a B2B media business that's for helping people that work in college athletics.
So do the colleges become your clients?
Many of them are. So we have thousands of people that I would say, with deep love and respect in my heart, are giant nerds. They're people that don't work in this industry, but they care so much about college sports that they'll read a story about Princeton's ticketing strategy or something. But my bread and butter are people that work in this field, whether athletic directors, coaches, senior associate commissioners somewhere. We do have some schools that will buy bulk subscriptions and use this as professional development, and we also will use this as college curriculum, which is it was very funny to me as somebody that wouldn't have gotten into some of the schools that use our work. If you're a sports management department, you might decide, "Oh, we can't use a textbook because this industry is changing so quickly. Let's just buy 80 subscriptions of Extra Points for our class. I'll give them a huge discount and I'll come speak to their students and they'll use this as they're teaching administrative issues in college athletics or NIL or labor law." And that's been a really gratifying part of this business for me.
Now, have you found the NCAA with all of the new things coming out, like NIL and the new laws that are coming out on NIL? Um, do you find that that's a brunt of your business now?
Um, in many ways, it is. I think my professional instinct is to typically zig where other people are zagging. It's going to be difficult for me to beat ESPN or Yahoo on some NCAA governance stories. Ross Dellinger's really good at what he does, and 9 out of 10 times he's going to beat me. What I can do, I'm still going to try. I'm still going to try to get that 1 out of 10 times. I'm a competitive person, but I've also found that where I can find some success is localizing some of those stories. So ESPN might, break the news about, say, an executive order that the Trump administration is considering. What
Right.
I can do is then call up four small schools and then write about what they think this might mean for them, because the national reporters are going to talk to Ohio State and Texas and Alabama first,
Right.
and I can go to St. Joe's or Marist or some of these other places. We do have many people at the NCAA who pay to read Extra Points and are reading it. But if you're in the business of writing about what's happening off the field, Lord knows I could write about governance changes and law changes and financial changes every week, and I would have something new to talk about because there's an enormous amount of structural change happening in college sports. It's not all
Yeah.
I do, but that is a big part of what I do.
Yeah. So what are some of the other topics that you're hitting while you're developing all of Extra Points?
Sure. So some of the other things that we write about fairly often that we found that our audience is very interested in. Some of that has been actually in the video game space. When Extra Points launched in 2020, there weren't any officially licensed college sports video games. And as NIL legislation and policy changed, what was not permitted in 2008 was suddenly permitted again. And through open records and through some sourcing that we've developed, I've broken a lot of news about the development of not just football games, but basketball games and what that means for licensing payments, what that means for the people that own stock in these gaming companies, what this means for institutions who are trying to grow revenue, because everybody from Penn State to Princeton to Prairie View A&M is trying to find a little bit more money.
Yeah.
Licensing revenue is increasingly part of that. So you have there, it's a consumer story because regular people like playing video games. It's also an industry story too, as they're trying to figure out how the finances and math and development time for all that work. We've also built a niche in covering a lot of realignment news, not just what happens again with bigger schools. If the Big Ten expands again, there's a pretty good chance I won't be the one to break it, although I will try. But when the WAC or the Big Sky or the NEC are expanding, I've broken a lot of those stories.
Yeah.
And then a lot of our audience are interested, like, well, who else are those guys talking to? What does that mean if I'm an administrator in the NE10 right now? What does
Yeah.
that mean if I'm in the Gulf South? And do I need to be looking over my shoulder, or what kind of contingency planning do I need to do? That's a big part of what I do. And then when we can, to try to do longer reporting that's either general human interest or exploring and expanding maybe a part of this world that people don't know as much about, like collegiate ultimate frisbee or rugby.
Wow.
I'm going to try to go to UTRGV for their first football game and talk about what that means for the Latino community, because there aren't a whole lot of Hispanic serving institutions that sponsor football, and this is an underserved part of the country. I look at that as not just a football story. That's an immigration, that's a demographic, that's a human interest, that's a culture story, and that's the kind of work that I really love doing.
Now, you said at the beginning that you're hiring a couple of more people to be reporters. Do you get these people as interns first from colleges? Do you work with interns? Do you not? Do you just find reporters?
I've used interns before. I think for the role that I'm actively hiring right now, we just bought another newsletter that's going to specifically just cover money in college sports. And I would look at that and think, I don't think that's an entry level position. I really do need somebody who's more experienced. And most of the people that we're interviewing tend to be people who are more in their 30s or older, who have been reporters for a long time. I have published undergraduate and graduate student work before. I think one of the things that makes our publication different from a lot of other places is I refuse to publish anything if I don't pay for it. I'm not going to go ask a college student to do work for me just for a clip and experience me writing something nice to his advisor. You're going to get the same rate that I would pay somebody who's been doing this for 12 years.
Wow.
Part of the challenge then is then finding student work that's high quality enough to be able to meet our standards. And I would love to be in a position where we grow enough where we can hire more entry level positions and we can bring on more people who are interns or who are just out of college. That's not where we are now. And not just reporters, but we hire people to do sales. We hire people to do product support, and we're really at a position, and we've made decisions how we grow. Where we tend to want people who are a little bit more experienced.
So how do people find Extra Points?
You can find Extra Points at www.extrapointsmb.com, and you can email me directly at matt@extrapointsmb.com.
Great. So we're coming to the end of our show, and usually I ask my guests, what advice do you want to give to the parents and the students that are watching this? What advice do you want to give them?
I think there are two things that I would want to share to any high schooler or a parent of a high schooler about the college application process, even though I know it's changed quite a bit from when I did it. The first thing I would recommend is to cast a wider net than you think you should, especially with the Common App and with institutions potentially waiving application fees depending on how strong of an applicant you are. make them say no. It's better to have other options, and you could potentially leverage some of those options to secure a better package for yourself. If I had to do it all over again, I would think it would apply to many more selective institutions than I actually did. That said, no, oh well, but then maybe I get into Brown, or maybe things change and I can negotiate for something a little bit better. So I would encourage people to look at lots of different schools. And the other thing that I would say, and I recognize that this is very difficult to hear from a stranger, or when you're 17 and you're going through this. Where you go is important, but it's not the end all be all. And I would not get super worked up over the relative prestige of different institutions, or thinking that your life or career is over if you don't go to place A or place B. There's a handful of, only a handful of jobs in this world, careers, where you go to school as an undergraduate deeply, deeply matters. It's unfortunate that journalism is one of them, but even then, there's still a pathway in. I'm an immigrant's kid from a land grant school that got more C's than A's, and now I make more money than a lot of national reporters and have more career security. How you take advantage of the opportunity that you have matters a lot more in most cases than where you end up going. Because the dirty little secret is they're using a lot of the same textbooks at Brown as they are at Ohio State, as they are at Wright State. The professors are different. Who's in your classroom may be different, but you can make the most out of almost wherever you go. So take the process seriously, but don't let it be your defining characteristic, or put so much pressure on yourself that you can't enjoy it.
Great. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
You bet. It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you've been watching The Secrets of College Planning. I'm your host, Anthony Uva. Until next time.